Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight is All Hallows Eve. So what a better time than now to look at a horror game for a good fright. I'll stop that now. As a lot of people do when it comes to Halloween, I fancy stepping into a bit of horror. Unfortunately for us, with this year in particular, you only have to watch the news or something like that. Well, anyway, ever since the Bethesda buyout was announced, I also felt the urge to look up some of their games that I never really gave a chance. So I thought it was a great time to look up The Evil Within. As I was reading about this game, everyone was saying how unscary it turned out and that it was a big disappointment. Why was that? Dear viewers, there are a few reasons for this. For one, this is a game by Resident Evil creator Shinji Mikami. It's the first horror game he's directed since Resident Evil 4, which was not only a groundbreaking horror game, it also created what we know as the modern third-person shooter. The Evil Within was also the first game by his new studio, Tango Gameworks, which was just brought out by Bethesda at the time. This allowed Tango the budget to make an amazing AAA horror game. At the time there was no AAA horror games on the market. Resident Evil was crapping itself and Silent Hill was just dying. Finally, The Evil Within was the only AAA horror game on the market to release on the next-gen consoles in October. This should have been an easy slam dunk, but when fans finally got their hands on it, they were met with a big old mess. People complained that it was a poor man's Resident Evil 4 that's also a technical pile of rubbish. So why did I pick this up? Easy. I've only got a handful of Survivor games under my belt that I've actually played, which includes Resident Evil 7 and the Resi 2 and 3 remakes. So I thought maybe I might find something good here. Maybe it might not meet up to the hardcore fan kind of love for it, but maybe a casual could get into it. Let's get this out of the way. I've never played Resi 4 as well, and I know there's a lot of comparisons to that, so yeah, I know I'm terrible. So let's start with the gameplay. It's your typical third-person shooter that a lot of people have compared to Resi 4, but from the footage I've seen of Resi 4, I don't 100% see that. It reminds me a lot more of The Last of Us than Resi 4, but then again I never played Resi 4, so I'm not 100% sure. There's also an upgrade system, because of course there's an upgrade system. It wouldn't be a AAA game without one. You get slime that you can purchase with upgrades, and if you want my advice with it, you'll want to put it all into sprint. You'll run for 2 seconds before your stamina's gone, and trust me, you need to sprint for as long as possible in this game. But while there's a lot of generic stuff in here, there's one really cool mechanic with matchsticks. In plenty of horror games, when you kill an enemy, they don't always stay down. In The Evil Within, you can take a matchstick and light an enemy on fire, killing them instantly. It's a really good idea. It's especially great when you can chain like 4 kills in one go, which is absolutely brilliant. I hope that it's an idea they build off in the sequel. The Evil Within also suffers from really unfair difficulty. Now before you say something like get good, I like difficulty. Stuff like Dark Souls is great when it feels tough but fair. The Evil Within though doesn't. It gets a ton of insta-kill stuff and it springs out of nowhere sometimes. Don't believe me? Here's a clip. If you want to avoid spoilers, go here. Yeah, that's not even all of it. I probably could put loads more in if I looked hard enough. I do realise death is a big motivator in a horror game, but that stops being scary when you're constantly dying to unfair deaths. All sense of fear is lost at that point. Another problem is that the game is so inconsistent with its world. It feels like the best of horror games as you go through a mental hospital, a mansion and a big city. Now there are some great visuals in these places and there are story reasons for this, but to be honest you could have picked one of these places and made an entire game out of it, and that result leads to the horror factor kind of slowly dying down as the game goes on. The first few chapters are the best, but the rest is kind of met when it comes to scares. There's also some good boss fights in here. The Keeper is the best one, but the problem again is a lot of insta kills. In most of these fights, when you die, you have to start all over again, which ruins the entire thing. So finally, the story. It's a complete mess. Skip to here if you want my final thoughts, as there will be spoilers from here on now. You play as Sebastian, an alcoholic cop, because of course he's an alcoholic cop, where else would it be? You and your partners are sent to a site of a mass murder at a mental hospital. During your investigation there, you find a video showing a hooded figure killing cops, only to find the figure right behind you. Sebastian is knocked out and awakes in a gore nest with a chainsaw maniac next to him, which starts the only unarmed stealth section in the game. What a weird way to start your third person shooter, guys. Eventually, Sebastian escapes with one of his partners, a doctor and a mental patient. And an earthquake happens and destroys the town, but you get knocked into a Victorian town, so it doesn't really matter at this moment. You're separated from everyone until you meet up with the doc, and then you help him find his patient, Leslie. The doc then informs you that the hooded figure is a man named Ruvik. After being separated from the doc, you meet up with your partner Joseph, who isn't doing too well as he goes into bouts of murderous rage. Eventually you save your other partner Kidman from a murder trap, and then you all get separated again. Sebastian eventually ends up in Ruvik's mansion and learns the tragic story of how him and his sister were burned alive and only Ruvik survived it. Ruvik, because of this, was hidden by his parents until he eventually kills them and starts trading with the mental hospital for patients for his experiments. Ruvik then makes STEM, a machine that can change reality to its user's will, but his partner, the doctor who we've been working with, shows it off to an organisation called Mobius, who wants it for themselves. In a last ditch effort, Ruvik makes the machine only work for him, which ends up getting him killed. Mobius takes his brain and uses it to work the machine, and thus revealing you are inside STEM, and all of this world and its monsters are the creation of Ruvik. You meet up with the doctor, who tells you that Ruvik wants Leslie. Why? To take over his body and enter the real world. You eventually make your way back to the mental asylum you started in, and you find Kidman trying to persuade you to kill Leslie. You ignore her, and then you have a big boss fight with Ruvik. After killing Ruvik and awakening in the real world, you find Kidman is actually working with Mobius, and Leslie might have been taken over by Ruvik. Wow, that's a great concept, but it's just terribly told in the game. And especially becomes apparent after you played the first two DLCs. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the DLC. The first two is about Kidman and reveals so much more about the story. The gameplay is slightly similar to the main game, but it's more stealth based this time round, and you only got guns for 2 bits of the game. No matches or upgrades either. The story goes along with the main game and reveals Kidman's relationship to the story and how she became a part of Mobius. She was a street kid abandoned by her parents, and Mobius gave her a second chance by training her to navigate the STEM system and to recover Leslie to use him to operate STEM. You start in the forest and you end up in a Mobius office, only to be trapped by Ruvik and saved by Sebastian like in the main game. You are separated again in quite a funny fashion afterwards, and then you are attacked by Joseph. After we beat him, we find Leslie and lead him into a church, only to be attacked by him after he's possessed by Ruvik. Kidman learns that Ruvik can leave STEM through Leslie and enter the real world. After trying to shoot Leslie, Kidman is teleported to the administrator, a man that works for Mobius, who tells her to continue to capture Leslie. Kidman refuses and is chased by the administrator. Eventually, Kidman ends up back at the Mobius headquarters. She heads down to the bottom of the building thinking Leslie is there. During the process, she learns Ruvik's relationship with Mobius, and she also heads back to the police station and learns about Sebastian and how his daughter died in a fire and his wife went missing. This is shown in the main game, but only through notes, so it can be entirely missed. So, great work there, game. You meet up with Sebastian in the city and he attacks you, but you don't fight him like Joseph. After meeting with Leslie again and getting a gun to defend him for a little bit, you end up meeting Sebastian again in the very similar scene from the main game, only for him to appear as the administrator, which leads you back to Mobius HQ. And then you head back to the mental asylum and reach the top to face the administrator. The administrator reveals STEM is made to control people through fear, and a true mission is to see if it works. Having beaten the control, Kidman then beats the administrator in a pretty cool boss fight and awakes in the real world, meeting Sebastian's wife, who works for Mobius. Yeah, so that's the story to The Evil Within, and to be honest, after playing all of this, I asked why Sebastian was the main character. He has no motivation other than don't die. He has no character arc or any characters if you come to think of it. Whereas Kidman had all of that and an actual plot. She was easily the more interesting out of the two, and the story kind of made more sense for her. So then, the final DLC. Where do we go from here? The story's mostly wrapped up other than, Ruvik and Leslie. Now, to be fair, that's sequel material, let's be quite honest, so what do we get? What's the final bit? An arcade first person melee boss rush. Yeah, I'm serious about that, and honest to God, it's one of the best bits of the game. You play as a father who is put into STEM to save his daughter who is trapped in STEM thanks to the nutter she's linked to, but instead of playing as some random dude, we get to play as the Keeper, one of the boss monsters from the game. And oh boy, is it good. You go about Ruvik's mansion beating monsters and bosses from the main campaign, but from a first person view. Since you're the Keeper, you also get to use his abilities such as a massive amount of strength, a big boy hammer and trap mines. But eventually as you start beating the bosses, you get other weapons such as RPGs and chainsaws. As you beat enemies, you get upgrades for more health, speed and strength among other things. But this time, you gain points from beating enemies, not goo. This game mode is so satisfying as you go up against bosses who one-shot you in the main campaign, only to beat them to death with your monster hammer. Funny enough, Joseph was one of the bosses in this mode, which is pretty cool. As you reach the end and meet your daughter, you find out that one mind is stopping you from saving her. Yourself. Yeah. A dark form of you, the Dark Keeper, comes and you have a boss fight with it, which, as you harm it, you also slowly die. Yeah, if you beat him, your character will die. Eventually, you do beat him and you free your daughter. It then shows your daughter waking up in the real world holding your hand, kind of leaving it up to you whether you survived or not. This DLC should have been the game. Yeah, I'm gonna say, if properly fleshed out, I think this DLC would have been great. It reminds me of Bioshock 2, and while that game isn't to everyone's taste, I love it. The Executioner DLC was a simple story with a lot of lore, and that's what The Evil Within should have been, not the mess that we got. So that's the game. Is it any good? Kind of. There's plenty of problems, like I said, that keeps it from being great. But there are some brilliant ideas in there that could be fleshed out for a really great sequel. Okay, I hope everyone likes this video and I hope to see you again some other time. Like and subscribe if you want to see more content.